morning. Again, welcome to Life Point Church, Life Point Crossing. Hey, an extra special shout out to everybody in this section here. You guys are my absolute favorites. Love y'all, every one of you. Hey, welcome back to What Would Jesus Say To? When I was putting this series together, there were any number of names, of course, that I thought of and thought, okay, maybe I'll do this one or no. Like, you can't even say that name without doing more damage than benefit. So the math is pretty easy, then you don't do it. And so whatever names that I thought of and then either decided to discard or decided to use. But there was one name that I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I had to include. And Emily, I am aware that in the excitement of playing bass today, forgot the clicker, so if you can be my clicker, I would appreciate that. That is going to be your girl, Taylor Swift. And so then there's this legitimate excitement about Taylor Swift. Okay, so she has really done kind of a remarkable thing in that she is really only, at least as far as I can tell, mildly controversial, but is the best known, probably most loved, highest profile person in our country, and not even specifically Kansas City, but probably even more Kansas City. And her Wikipedia page literally says that her life is a subject of widespread media coverage. Yes, it is. She, I'm sure, needs no introduction, but some interesting things that I found out about her when I was looking stuff up. Her name really is Taylor Swift, so that was something. She is 34 years old today, and if that makes you feel however it does about if you're like ahead or behind of the life spot that you thought you should be in, whatever that does, but she's put out her first album called Taylor Swift when she was 16 years old. It was a little bit murky, but it sounded like she signed the contract when she was 14. What were you doing when you were 14? But she has sold over 200 million albums. She has won 14 Grammy Awards, 40 American Music Awards, including 4 times Global Artist of the Year last decade. She was named Artist of the Decade. Well, thank you, Jim. This is better probably for everybody. You're off the hook, Emily. Artist of the Decade for the last decade. I suspect she is well in the lead for the current decade. She is Times Person of the Year for 2023. She is credited as being the first billionaire with music as her primary source of income. I didn't really know that was a category, but I guess that's her. And to me, really most impressively, completely upstaged the National Football League by making your favorite tight end, Travis Kelce, her favorite player, and thereby making her presence or lack thereof every week at the Chiefs game the biggest sports story of the week. Whether or not she was watching football was a bigger story than the football. I've never seen anything like it. Yes, her life is a subject of widespread media attention. So just because it's kind of fun, here's where she first really blipped onto my radar. Of course, I knew who she was, but what you see on the screen behind me is a still from the video for her song, I Know You Were Trouble When You Walked In. And the band that you see there is a real band. They're not one of my favorite bands. They're probably not one of my 100 favorite bands. However, what they are is brutally heavy and shockingly, explicitly Christ-centered. Their literal name that they chose for themselves is the Great Commission. And so they played a show once when I was living in Louisville, Kentucky. I think they were with a band that I liked, and so I went and they played, and it was good. I liked it. They're a little vanilla and a little kind of samey for my tastes personally, but it was good. It was good enough. I bought the CD. I still have it. I've held on to it for all of these years, and it's just, to me, I don't understand at all how Taylor Swift connected with really, in my opinion at least, like kind of mediocre, Christ-centered, sludgy deathcore band, but it happened. So that's interesting, at least to me. So clearly she is on some level intersected with all of our lives in one way or another. And she's probably the most known, best loved person in our society. And as I mentioned, has seemed to do that with remarkably little backlash. That's very unique, I think. Most people, when you get to a certain level of publicity, there's a serious backlash that always comes at you then, right? And I'm sure she's had some, but at least from what I've been familiar with or what's been on my radar has been really pretty little. And so that's pretty amazing. It seems like almost everybody loves her, and even the people who don't love her, they don't really dislike her. It's a pretty good accomplishment. So I don't know if she considers herself great or ever set out to be great or to be seen as great, but I am confident that if you took a poll of our public right now about who is the best or the most loved or the greatest person, that she would not only be near the top, I suspect she would win, and maybe by a healthy margin. Her talent is great. Her success has been great. Her wealth has grown to be great. Her status and influence are great. She might be the best, or at least the most agreed upon paragon of great in our society today. Well, this is in fact not a message about Taylor Swift. This is a message about Jesus. So, there was a day that Jesus and his disciples were traveling. They were walking. It was a long walk. And at that time, I believe iPhones were still fairly new, so they didn't have all of the apps and games that we have today. And so what they did is they spoke to one another. For the young people, this is what they did back in biblical times. And the topic up for debate that day was who among them was the greatest. And that's part of how I know they didn't have social media, is because probably there's different ways to determine. But now we just check our likes and followers and be like, oh, hey, it's me. I'm the greatest, you know. Peter, he just says crazy things, and then people follow him. How does Thomas get all those shares just from telling people to prove stuff? I don't know. But they didn't have that, and so what they had to do was discuss it among themselves, and it seems like maybe they were not able to come to a conclusion, or maybe the conclusion they all came to was that each one of them thought they were the greatest, which brings up an interesting point. How do people all come to different conclusions on something like that? Well, I think it's because we can disagree on who is or isn't great because we use different criteria to measure greatness. Maybe Andrew thought he was the greatest because he was the first one. He'd been there the longest. He was the OG disciple. Who are all you Johnny-come-latelys here? Maybe Johnny-come-lately John thought he was the greatest because he was kind of like a word artist. If you were in 2024, he'd probably be writing poetry or song lyrics or something like that. Maybe Matthew thought he was the greatest because he'd left a lifestyle of wealth and luxury to follow Jesus. He had really sacrificed. That's got to make you great, right? Well, I don't know if Taylor Swift thinks she's great or not. But I do know a little bit about how the human mind works. And one element of that is you will believe whatever you are told if you're told enough times. And she has had praise and adoration raining down upon her since she was a very young, impressionable teenager, probably earlier, and going on for a couple decades now. So if that kind of gets to affect the way you think and see things, I don't even know if that makes you arrogant. I think that just makes you human, really. Now, I don't know, though. Maybe she exactly knows how regular of a person she is and thinks the whole celebrity worship thing is kind of absurd. When I was in college for half of a summer with a group of people, I went to the Philippines for 6 weeks, and being a white American in the Philippines, you are a celebrity just for existing and being there. It was crazy. People would call out to you when you were walking down the street. We did a performance that we did at all sorts of places, schools, universities, churches, and especially the schools. We got mobbed. We signed so many autographs. I'm not even kidding. We got fan mail from some of these kids when we got back to the U.S., and we were all there, and in 2 weeks, we're going home, and we're just another guy in line at the store. We're nobodies. And so it was really interesting to sort of recognize how this works and be in that spot a little bit to see how, man, this is really just dumb. So maybe that's her. Maybe people clamor about and are trying to get autographs and pictures, and she's thinking very normal people thoughts. I sing good, but it's not really that different. Oh no, did I forget my parents' anniversary? Or someone should tell these people that when I get up in the morning, I have my assistants put my pants on one leg at a time. Maybe she has that. Or maybe she has kind of bought into the idea that she's a little more important or should be treated a little differently from everybody else. I don't know, but as a singer, songwriter, entertainer, there is no question, based on those, that she has become great. And I very firmly suspect that you don't reach her level of greatness without both a tremendous amount of just God-given natural ability, but then also a tremendous drive to work and become as great as you can, to define and refine and maximize that ability so that you do become great. And there's no question that she has done that, at least in terms of albums sold, success, popularity, general likability, influence, anything like that. Well, back to Jesus. Here's how Mark records the event that follows this walk to the town called Capernaum. Is after they arrived at Capernaum and settled in a house, Jesus asked his disciples, "What were you discussing out on the road? It was a long walk. I heard you talking. What did you use that time for?" Busted. They didn't want to answer because they'd been arguing about which of them was the greatest. You remember when you were a kid and you used to drop hints in conversations to have somebody ask you about something or give you a chance to tell them about something that in your youthful lack of self-awareness you thought made you awesome. But then you kind of grow up, and as an adult you look at that, and kids do it because they're kids, but you're like, yeah, that's kind of just immaturity. Well, I think this is kind of the disciples as adults recognizing that they'd just kind of done the kid thing, and now here's Jesus as the adult in the room, and they've been with him long enough. This is Mark chapter 9. They've been with Jesus long enough. They have some idea what he's about, and they know that he wouldn't have wanted them arguing about which one was the greatest. So they just say nothing, but he sat down, called the 12 disciples over to him, and he said, "Whoever wants to be first must take last place and be the servant of everyone else." Now, this is interesting, isn't it? Because the very premise of Jesus' statement here is that someone wants to be first, wants to be great. Now, there are so many things in this world that are good things. They really are. Then they get messed up, and stuff gets kind of blown up, and they can really become kind of something of a problem. So Jesus doesn't say that you shouldn't want to be great. He doesn't say that you shouldn't be great. In fact, he's assuming that that's the case for everybody here. But the criteria that the disciples were using to measure greatness was very different from the criteria that Jesus was using. You might measure greatness by how many people are serving you. Jesus says this is really more about how many people are you serving. Right? Here's the way to really hit the bullseye on being the person who God created you to be, is not to be bigger, but to live for something bigger than yourself and outside of yourself. It's not about how many people are serving you. It's about how many people are you serving. And it's great to be great. It really is. Like, be great. That's wonderful. But let's be very clear about how we're defining greatness. And what's our criteria here? And Jesus says it's about serving other people. It's about putting other people before yourself. It's just this delightfully Jesus paradoxical, kind of counterintuitive answer that completely reshapes the way we see and think about ourselves and other people, and the way we conduct ourselves as we all seek to become great and advance by climbing down the ladder. Now, there is a lot here, and some of it I think can be and often is misunderstood, because I don't think, all that said, I don't think Jesus is saying that Taylor Swift shouldn't be on stage singing in front of thousands of people. I don't think he's saying that every CEO or executive should resign their position and take up a job in the mailroom if we still have mail rooms, or start walking dogs, or whatever that might be. I do think he's saying that your status as an entertainer or as a CEO is a terrible criteria for determining greatness. But if we're going to have music, someone's got to sing. So, okay, Taylor Swift, she's really good. Let's have her sing. That's not wrong. Here's what's wrong, is when whatever position you are in, is when you leverage that to have other people be about serving you rather than you serving them. So for pop star examples, maybe kind of silly, but what would be wrong is if the questions and the decisions that drove her career were things like, what can we do to cause the masses to make me rich and famous and successful. You know, my last album sold so well, I know I can make a shoddy, mediocre album, and they'll still give us their money. Hey, I wonder how ridiculous of a convenience fee we can put into these concert tickets, and they'll still sell out the stadium. A little bit easy and kind of cartoonish, like cartoon villain examples, but obviously examples of using where you are to have other people serve you. The flip side of those would be things like, okay, well, how can I give to my fans and listeners something that's of real value and something that they will enjoy and make their day a little bit better when they listen to it? I know that every person in this stadium paid an exorbitant convenience fee for the privilege of paying for the ticket. So I am tired from months of touring, but I'm going to dig deep and give everything I can to give them the best show that I possibly can. And so it's the same for entertainment or an executive or anywhere. It's the person who looks like they have a high position. Well, this is really irrelevant to whether or not they're great. How are you using that position, right? There are surely many, many people who are working in the mailroom or factory line workers who are way ahead of the CEOs who look like they have a great position by the way Jesus measures greatness. But when your power and influence are leveraged in such a way that it serves other people rather than having them serve you, that now is true greatness from literally any position, whether you're singing in front of thousands or alone with a mop. Your position does not determine greatness. It's not that every CEO should quit their job and that a lower position is better. It's that it's all about how you leverage your position for yourself or for others. That's what determines greatness. So I don't think that the factory worker is greater than their supervisor, who is greater than the manager, who is greater than the engineer, who is greater than the CEO. I think the point is that anybody, anywhere in that spectrum has the exact same opportunity for greatness from wherever their position is. And I do think that without doubt, there are many, many factory line workers who love God and serve people who are way ahead of the CEOs who are on Fast Company or Forbes magazine, but are doing it for their own glorification. I think there are many, you may not even know this is a thing, but many big name pastors who write books and speak at conferences and lead large churches, who do it because that is the best way for them to leverage who God made them for the benefit of anybody who would hear them speak or read their book or be a part of their church. And I think they will be very great in the kingdom of heaven. I think there are many people with identical looking resumes, many big name pastors with identical looking resumes who do it for their own glory and for people to serve and admire them, and they will be seen very, very differently. In fact, I think there are many people at literally every church in the country who have no position whatsoever, never write or say anything public, who are extraordinarily great in the way that they serve God and people. And so in the next chapter now, that was from Mark 10, but by Mark 9, by Mark 10, there's a similar situation that happens, and it seems like the disciples maybe didn't quite get it. So Jesus talks again, but this time he goes a step further even. He says, so Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers in this world, here's what they do, is they lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. You kind of sense there's a but coming, don't you? But among you, no, it'll be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you, and that's okay to be a leader, someone has to, okay, but here's how you're going to do it, must be a servant. And whoever wants to be first among you, someone's got to be first. You can't have a second or a third. Like, someone's got to be first. But here's what's going to happen is whoever wants to be first among you, here's how you do this, is you must be the slave of everyone else. And then he goes even one step further, and he says, for even the Son of Man, which is what he calls himself, came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. And this is why we love and worship Jesus. This is why he's not another person who's just a footnote in history, is because as very God in human flesh, he was categorically by himself as the greatest being to ever walk on this planet. And what did he use that opportunity for? To serve the people around him and really into eternity from there. And so here are the things that I think Jesus might say to Taylor Swift. I think he might start with, hey, Taylor, you're a great entertainer. And whether she knows it or thinks about it or cares about it, I think that Taylor Swift glorifies God by using the talent that he's given her. I don't have any reason to believe Jesus would have a problem with that. If you're a singer, sing. If you're a songwriter, write. Do it to the best of the ability that God has blessed you with. That's not bad. That's good. You should be the most of what God created you to be. But he'd say, Taylor, you're a great entertainer, but that's not how I measure greatness. If you want to be truly great, and that's okay, you can be great, but here's the way we do it. You want to be very careful about the criteria by which we measure greatness. It's not by using your position to achieve wealth and status and whatever else it is that you want. It's by leveraging whoever and wherever you are to serve and love God and people. And you can see that potentially, other than the you're a great entertainer part, that translates beautifully to all of us and anybody here. You want to be great? Okay, good, let's do it. Let's be great. But here's how you're going to do it, is by seeking to serve rather than by seeking to be served. If you're an employee in an entry level or what we would consider a low status position, and I've lived a really sort of unique life, I guess. I've worked a ton of no experience needed type jobs over the years. And I know it's really easy, a lot of those, to kind of show up and do your job halfway, and there's no real repercussion. I also know it's really easy to justify that because you say things like, there's no reason that I should be busting my backside for the rich jerks in the suits who are just trying to pay me as little as possible, and sort of have that make a lot of sense to you. But serve your company, serve your supervisor, serve the customers if you have interaction with them. And it's pretty likely that you won't stay in your entry-level position, but that's really beside the point. Whether or not you do, that will make you great the way Jesus measures greatness. If you're the executive or the business owner or management, or serve your employees, serve your customers, your vendors, your clients, not in the PR statement way of spinning how you exploit one group to say that you serve the others, but to make anybody who comes into contact with you or your company a blessing, to make them better for it. And honestly, it's pretty likely that your company is going to become great in growth and profits, but whether it does or not is beside the point. That is great in the kingdom of heaven. If you're in politics or public service, oh, come on. How great would you be working for the people and the public rather than for your own career path or your next campaign? Greatness is well within the grasp of everybody, regardless of who you are and where your life is. In fact, it's a little bit unfair because I don't know her, but I suspect there are many people here today who are greater than Taylor Swift. Let's just bring the way that we measure greatness into line with how Jesus measures greatness. It was really embarrassing for the disciples when they'd been arguing about who was the greatest, and then Jesus says, hey, what did you do with that long walk that you had? I don't exactly know how this works, but when you and God are looking back at the life that he gave you, you're not going to care at all about how people looked at you or what they thought of you, if you were something big and important or if you were nothing and irrelevant. Here's what you're going to want. You are going to want to have used the life that God gave you to love and serve God and people. That is what Jesus will call great. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much in ways that we could never imagine or expect or even think of on our own. That Jesus not only tells us the way to live the life that you have for us, but showed us and went further than any of us will ever have the capacity to do. Thank you that he's not just the Savior and himself very God, but he is the servant and the template for how we live and become who you have created us to be. And still praying, if you're here and maybe you've never taken that first step to connect with Jesus, maybe you never thought about the way in which he, as himself very God, lived to serve you for your good, despite that it was also for God's glory. And maybe this is the piece that comes together for you. Maybe it has nothing at all to do with anything that was said, but we all know we're sinners. There have been things that are wrong. We knew they were wrong. We did them anyway. And sin destroys the relationship between us and a perfect, holy, righteous God, the same way that wrongdoing puts you on the wrong side of the law. And what can a sinful human being possibly do to repay their Creator God for their sin? There's nothing, but that's why Jesus, that is the whole good news of Jesus, that he, as himself very God, came, lived a sinless life, and his death on the cross was him satisfying justice for our sin, for our wrongdoing. We take his sinlessness, he takes our sinfulness, and we are adopted as children in the family of God. If that's you, just right where you sit, you can pray in your heart or out loud, or if you're watching online, say, God, I believe that Jesus Christ came and died and resurrected so that I could be forgiven and adopted as a child in your family. And please come into my life. Forgive me and adopt me. Begin to make me into the person you created me to be. And give me the life that you have for me. Listen, if that's you, if you've just said a prayer like that for the first time, it's not the words of the prayer that saves you, it's just that you put your faith in Jesus. God's grace comes to you through that, and you are a new spiritual creation. Will you do yourself the next biggest favor you can and let somebody know? Go out to the point, that's just the corner in the lobby after we're done, let them know the decision you made. They'll take your information, and so we can follow up with you and have you taking good, healthy steps toward the life that God has for you. If you're online, send us a message one way or another, and we'll be able to get that and be in touch. For the rest of us, it's so easy to live on. You don't even have to make a decision. Default mode is to live for ourselves and our own glory and greatness. To make the decision to fight against that, to be great in the way that Jesus defines it, to be great in service to the other people around us, to follow the example that we see in Jesus Christ himself as we call ourselves followers of him, that we would walk in his steps in the way that he served and loved other people. Whatever that way is for you, whether it's an employee or a spouse or a parent or a child or a neighbor or any other situation in which you find yourself. And Father, we're so grateful for the clarity with which you speak to us through Jesus Christ and your word. And we now ask that by your Spirit you would give each one of us here the strength and the power and the follow-through to make these decisions, to follow who you've created us to be into real Monday through Saturday life change for your greatness and your glory. In the name of Jesus Christ.
Hey, LifePoint,